In January of 2010, Pat Maris was at home in Florida when her phone rang. She answered, and the voice on the other end was Mark McGwire. He'd recently accepted a new job, his first in Major League Baseball since retiring. He was set to be the Cardinals' hitting coach. But first, he had to make amends with Roger Maris's widow. That day, McGwire told her he'd been using anabolic steroids when he broke her late husband's record. Here's Roger Maris Jr., Pat's son.
I mean, she was happy that he owned up to it, and just wished him the best of luck. She didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know what was going to happen, the repercussions, but she was glad that he came clean and hoped that, he was going to be a better person for it. And I thought that was big of him. He didn't have to do that.
McGwire wanted to make sure she heard the news from him, not secondhand, because he was about to tell the world.
The big story in baseball, perhaps the biggest story in sports this week, is the admission by Mark McGwire that he did in fact use steroids throughout his Major League Baseball playing career.
McGwire's confession was carefully orchestrated. He released a statement to the Associated Press, the same news source that had broken the story of his andro use, and then sat for an interview with Bob Costas on MLB Network. But despite all the planning, it landed awkwardly.
You used them first what season?
Well, what season? During the season would be starting. I started using it the winter of '93, '94, going in that season.
McGwire said he'd been so beaten down by injuries in the early 90s that he'd considered retiring until steroids helped him get healthy again. But that's about all the credit he gave the drugs, which he kept on taking for years.
I knew I was talented. I knew the man upstairs gave me the ability to hit this baseball, gave me the hand-eye coordination. My parents gave me the great genetics, but I was running these roadblocks.
Could you have hit 70 home runs? Could you have had a home run ratio greater than anything Babe Ruth did in his time without using steroids?
Absolutely. I was given this gift by the man upstairs.
I was surprised when he repeatedly claimed that all he needed it for was to get back on the field and that he would have otherwise done exactly what he did without PEDs.
That's Costas, telling me about the confession a decade later.
I'm not sure he's lying. Maybe he really believes it. Maybe he's convinced himself that he didn't need PEDs to put up the numbers he put up.
There's not a pill or an injection that is going to give me the hand-eye or give any athlete a hand-eye coordination to hit a baseball.
Well, if that's the case, then you must genuinely regret. You could have done essentially what you did without ever touching performance-enhancing drugs.
It's the most regrettable thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, he wouldn't come off of it, Joan. And I had some second thoughts the next day. Should I have done, full prosecutorial on him? But as it was unfolding, I knew that he was on the ropes. Did I have to really deliver the knockout blow? I felt bad for him.
As far as confessions go, this was bad. For years, McGwire and other superstar steroid users had wanted everyone to ignore what they saw with their own two eyes and believe the unbelievable. And here he was, appealing to America to keep on fooling itself. It didn't land.
This should have been a great day for McGwire, for the first day of the rest of his baseball life, and he blew it.
I'm sorry, in 2010, I think you'd be naive to believe that there's no connection between steroids and performance.
And one of his things was, in his tearful apology, is, I want to apologize to all the players. Hey, Mark, how about apologizing to all the fans?
The steroid era is over, but its damage still covers baseball in a thin sheen of grime. From some angles, it's unnoticeable. But from others, in the glaring spotlight of MLB Network's cameras, it can be impossible to ignore. Still, for the most part, the sport has moved on. Most fans have moved on, or else they're not fans anymore. And for those of us who stuck around, who've kept on loving this flawed game, I wonder how much of the hurt we're allowed to forget. In this episode, we move from the scandal to its fallout. What it did to the league's reputation, to players' legacies, to our memories. Has baseball recovered? Will it? Does it have to? I wonder sometimes how I'd feel if steroids had never happened. Maybe I'd love baseball more, or maybe I'd love it less if I hadn't worried I might have to give it up. I'm Joan Neeson, and this is the final episode of Crushed. We've all been through a lot this past year. Many of us are feeling out of sorts emotionally and still experiencing uncertainty. Trust me, I get it. It's totally understandable to feel burned out or emotionally drained, and it could also be a sign you should talk to somebody. You're not alone, and online therapy can help. Crushed is supported by BetterHelp Online Therapy. It's more convenient and more affordable than in-person therapy, and financial aid is available. Listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/crushed. That's betterhelp.com/crushed. Crushed is brought to you by Progressive, one of the country's leading providers of auto insurance. With Progressive's Name Your Price tool, you say what kind of coverage you're looking for and how much you want to pay, and Progressive will help you find options that fit within your budget. Use the Name Your Price tool and start an online quote today at progressive.com. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
McGwire said he wished he had never played in the steroid era.
That's Steve Wilstein.
Well, he made the steroid era. He and Canseco, others copied them. He didn't play in the steroid era, he created it.
It had been more than a decade since he reported about McGwire's use of androstenedione, since he cast the first doubt. So of course Wilstein watched the confession, and he was let down by what he heard. He's been asking the Slugger for an interview for years, and hasn't had any better luck than I have. But he does have quite the list of questions prepared.
I would ask him to talk honestly about why he started using steroids, when he started using it. Did it just come from his brother, just come from Canseco? What exactly was he using? What did he think it did for him? How long did he use it? What were his regrets about it? What do you think his impact was on other players? Did he think that Bonds and others used it because of him?
Wilstein's a total pro. Those are all great questions, and they're pretty much what I'd like to know. McGwire should have answered them a decade ago. But I do wonder, even if he'd told the God's honest truth, would America have reacted any differently? And I know, I keep saying that's what we wanted. Honesty, openness. But what happens when we get it?
We have this view that when people confess to things, we forgive them. And it's not true.
That's Mike Norton, the Harvard professor who studies cheating, the one I confessed my crossword puzzle sins to.
If it fixed the damage, more people would do it. You know, if you said, here's how I cheated, and they said, oh, okay, well, then you can come back on the team and we'll restore your contract. I bet more people would confess, but it's not typically how it works.
Actually, though, that is how it worked for McGwire, who'd been out of the spotlight for years at that point. MLB had distanced itself from most prominent players with ties to steroids. Jose Canseco was rattling around independent ball, sometimes speaking out against drugs, sometimes endorsing them. Barry Bonds had retired and was waiting to go on trial for obstruction of justice. Sammy Sosa was out of the game too, and the minute he left Chicago, the Cubs began to distance themselves. Ownership has said repeatedly over the years that he's unwelcome at Wrigley Field unless he apologizes for using steroids. Baseball seemed to want to erase these men from its history, and now one wanted back in.
I'm asking for a second chance. I have a lot to offer. I have a whole Rolodex of things I love to teach hitters.
We like big public apologies that are shaming for people because we feel now that they've gotten it bad enough that maybe we can let them back in. I'm from Massachusetts. We have in our history the pillory. That's like the wooden thing, and you put your arms and head through it, and then they lock you there for a while, and everybody thinks you're a jerk, and they can like throw rotten fruit at you or whatever they want to do. I'm not suggesting that we do that, but in fact, the only thing that satisfies us is the punishment itself. Every day I walk past you with your head in the wooden thing, I see that you're being punished, and after a week I can say, all right, that was enough. Let's let him back in.
McGwire's confession wasn't anything close to a pillory, not even a metaphorical one. I was at the home opener at Busch Stadium when he debuted as the Cardinals' hitting coach, 3 months after he came clean. I watched as he rode around the perimeter of the field in a red convertible and waved at fans in the city most willing to forgive and forget. But every time McGwire went on the road that summer and faced media outside of St. Louis, he had to answer the same questions all over again. Maybe that was his pillory. And it must have been excruciating. But he did it, as a kind of penance. It was part of the deal. So yes, McGwire was let back in. He became a hitting coach, was beloved by the players he worked with, and stuck around for almost a decade with the Cardinals, then the Dodgers, and the Padres. But that didn't change the fact that many people on the outside saw him, and still see him, as the face of the steroid era. He is blamed for poisoning a game we hold dear, even though MLB didn't have an explicit rule banning steroids while he played. In fact, McGwire never failed an MLB steroid test. He was never even made to take one. Here's Howard Bryant, the ESPN reporter.
If the Mark McGwire argument, which is, well, it wasn't against baseball law, whatever the hell that is, right? Then why did you hide it? You know the difference between right and wrong. We're not talking to a bunch of 4-year-olds here. If your argument really was that there was no rules against it, then you would not have concealed it. You would have said, well, there are no rules, and until there are rules, I'm going to keep doing this.
I agree, but I do wonder, is it fair to only blame players for a systemic problem? I asked Norton about that, and he told me something I found really interesting about why we find it so easy to be angry at people like McGwire.
It's more salient in sports. It's more salient with celebrities in general when we find out they've cheated. So when a huge bank defrauds another huge bank about something or other, none of us know what happened. We don't know was there some paperwork? We just can't imagine what was going on. But with steroids, we know, because we know that we used to try to play whatever we used to try to play. And we know that we weren't as good as we wanted to be. And we didn't cheat. And they did. So we can simulate the other outcome. And that makes it much, much harder for us to forgive.
So we point fingers at the guys whose jerseys we gave away out of disgust and shame. Or, like I did, held onto in spite of ourselves. It's easy to picture a face, a once treasured baseball card, and channel anger there, in a straight and uncomplicated line to the men who were once our heroes. And that ignores a massive part of the steroids story. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the players are innocent. I'm just saying it's absurd and a total institutional failure that they were expected to hold themselves to a standard MLB wouldn't even put into writing. Because the league, well, it was just as greedy as the steroid users, if not more so.
My biggest problem with Bud is that he refuses to take any responsibility.
Bryant's referring to Bud Selig, the former commissioner who presided over this whole mess.
He has no growth on this subject. He says the same things now that he said then. I mean, everyone has to take their piece of it. The players have to take their piece of it because they were the ones using the drugs. The teams have to take their responsibility because they weren't enforcing anything. They didn't care. They exploited it as well, as did the managers, as did the owners. The writers have to take their piece of it. I did my very best to report what I knew and to write what I knew. But that being the case, could we all have done way, way more and way, way better? Absolutely. We failed.
For more than a decade, there has been widespread illegal use of anabolic steroids and other performance-enhancing substances by players in Major League Baseball.
That's George Mitchell, speaking at a press conference after the Mitchell report was released. The information he shared was damning, and the report called the steroid era a collective failure. Everybody was in the wrong. And that's about all the report got right. The report was supposed to put MLB under a microscope, help the league turn a corner. And it did document the institutional failures and make several recommendations about drug policies and cooperating with law enforcement. But the report only skimmed the surface of the problem. It didn't hold anyone in power accountable. It didn't point out all the ways managers, front offices, and owners were so distracted by dollar signs that they intentionally looked the other way.
There's not proof about them actually handing them out in clubhouses.
That's Dave Zirin, the sports editor at The Nation. He wrote frequently about baseball in the aftermath of the steroid era.
This idea of benign neglect, of looking the other way. I mean, anyone who's been in a clubhouse would know that, like, the facilitation of drugs without people in management knowing is kind of ludicrous.
Zirin thought the Mitchell report was more about PR than change, about shifting blame away from the league and toward players. Everyone from Bonds and McGwire to someone like Jeremy Cummings, who was just fighting to survive in a game that stacked the odds against him. In fact, it focused most of its resources on investigating players and cobbling together a list of 89 guys who'd allegedly used. And that list, that's what people remember.
Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Miguel Tejada, those are just some of the big names revealed in a 20-month investigation into performance-enhancing drug use in baseball.
Sports columnists across America criticized the report, but many fans took it as gospel, as proof of which players were bad and which were good, who they could love and who they'd have to leave behind. There was no consideration of how these men reached the point where they decided the best option was to cheat. It was safer to blame a few guys who could be hastily scrubbed from the league's history than to look inward at a beloved American institution.
Baseball was trying to cover its own tracks, protect ownership, protect general managers, protect the pipeline, and throw a couple of players under the bus. And that's exactly what the Mitchell report delivered. I mean, the idea is you project the message that we aren't run by cheaters, we're on the up and up, and then people go back to the parks.
Same as it is, same as it ever was. MLB wanted butts in seats. After all, attendance had surged over the course of the steroid era after bottoming out in the seasons after the strike. So the home run race brought fans back. But it never would have happened without steroids. And now the league was scared steroids would chase those same fans away.
Can you have a financial renaissance and a moral decline simultaneously? The answer is yes. They literally felt like they were fighting for the survival of their industry. And that's why there was no appetite to really look at what was taking place. I remember I was covering the Yankees in 2002. We were in San Diego. We're sitting out there, hanging out on the field waiting for BP, for the players to come out. And here comes Reggie Jackson.
Jackson had been retired since 1987, the dawn of the steroid era. But he knew a few things about the almighty home run. He'd hit 563 of them over the course of his career and had been a first ballot Hall of Famer.
And Reggie has a very mischievous, you could also say mean-spirited sense of humor. You can't tell when Reggie's joking or not, right? So here comes Reggie, and he's in this really foul mood, and he walks up to all of us and looks at us, and he's like, "When are you fucking guys gonna do your jobs?" And we're like, "What did we do now, Reggie? What's this all about? Gee, what are you pissed off about today?" And he essentially says, because of all the drugs, because of all these guys using steroids, 10 years from now, I'm gonna be 20th on the all-time home run list.
At that point, Jackson was 8th all-time, and the retired slugger wasn't shy about sharing what he thought of baseball's transformation, that it had to be fueled by steroids, that these guys were cheating their way to history. Now, Jackson's prediction almost came true. Today, he's 14th on the all-time home run list, and the 500 Club, the elite group of players who hit that many career home runs, well, it's maybe not so elite anymore. When he retired, Jackson was one of just 14 members. Now, there are almost twice as many. So that devalues the home run. And then, of course, there's the problem of Bonds. Juiced, swollen, looks nothing like he used to, Barry Bonds is baseball's home run king.
There was a time when the all-time home run record was the most important sports record in this country. It was the all-time home run record, it was the Triple Crown, and it was the heavyweight championship. And that's what people cared about.
Here's Roger Maris Jr. again.
The long ball used to be cherished. Now people go, was he juicing? That's going to always be in the back of everybody's head, and that's what the steroid era did to baseball.
Baseball's record books were once its most sacred currency. They transformed mortals into gods, and now they're too muddy to make sense of. Home runs came too cheap for too many years. Which at least partially explains why Bonds isn't in the Hall of Fame. See, baseball writers are the ones who make the picks for the Hall, And so far, they haven't voted him in. 2021 is his final year of eligibility, so he still has a shot. But Sosa definitely won't get in. McGwire didn't. And that didn't come as much of a surprise. No one seriously suspected of using steroids has ever made it.
I remember when I got my first ballot in 2008, and I remember saying there's going to come a point in time when this entire ballot is steroid guys. And what are you going to do when that day comes?
What Bryant did was stop voting. And he's not alone. Many other writers have given up their vote on similar grounds. MLB never really punished any of these superstar steroid users. And then, once they'd retired, it expected writers to be judge and jury.
I had a Hall of Fame vote, and the first guys from the steroid era started coming up, and I thought about it, and I could not in good conscience vote for somebody who basically rigged the game, who cheated.
That's Nancy Armour, the writer who chased McGwire through Wrigley in a walking boot in '98.
So I stopped voting for the Hall of Fame. I didn't want to elect somebody not knowing that they had used steroids and then find out later that they had. But I also didn't want to not give somebody the benefit of the doubt or not give somebody credit who deserved it. And I couldn't figure out a good enough way to determine who those people were. Baseball was basically like, okay, we're just going to wipe the slate clean and start from this point. Okay, that's fine, but there needed to be some kind of reckoning. I know Bonds will never be as beloved as Hank Aaron, but the public shame is the only penalty he's ever paid. And to me, that has never sat right. I think baseball was just looking for a way out, and that was the easiest and least painful way for them to do it.
In 2014, Selig retired, and steroids clouded his legacy. But that didn't stop him from getting into Cooperstown. You see, writers only vote on players. Hall of Famers and executives get to weigh in on everyone else. So Selig made the cut because baseball had boomed on his watch. It had built stadiums and set attendance records. And for those voters, that was enough. Tony La Russa, the manager most tied to the teams with widespread steroid use in the 80s and 90s, he got in too.
The thing that was the final straw for me in not voting was the fact that they voted themselves into the Hall of Fame. So essentially, we're penalizing the players, and they get to honor themselves. And I didn't want to participate in that. This goes back to that institutional failure. Should Barry Bonds be in the Hall of Fame because he's a great, great player? Absolutely. Should Barry Bonds be in the Hall of Fame because Bud Selig's in the Hall of Fame? Absolutely. Am I putting Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame? No, I'm not.
Bonds may still get in. I don't have a vote, but if I did, I might be tempted to check the box next to his name. After all, he had first ballot Hall of Fame numbers before he ever visited Balco, before he saw what McGwire and Sosa did and what baseball didn't do when it was obvious they were juicing. And over the course of reporting this podcast, I've started to think it's okay to have flawed heroes. It's just not okay to honor them without also recognizing their mistakes. Oh, and just for the record, I wouldn't have voted for McGwire. And not out of any personal spite about his choices. I just don't think he had the numbers. Steroids gave him his Hall of Fame caliber years, no matter what he says about hitting all those home runs without them. And McGwire is kind of represented at Cooperstown. The museum has a whole exhibit commemorating the highlights of the steroid era. There's a scorecard from the night of '62, and McGwire's bat and his jersey. And there's an explanation that the home run race was tainted by performance-enhancing drugs. And I think that, at least, gets this whole messy business right. Should we honor these men who cheated and lied? Probably not. But should we honor the memories, the magic, what it meant to me and you and everyone who experienced September 8th, 1998? I think yes, absolutely. We'll be back after the break. Stay with us.
DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is putting you in the center of the action with endless ways to make it rain. From live betting to betting on your favorite players, they do it all. Check out the app every day this week to cash in on their daily odds boosts. And now, for a limited time, DraftKings Sportsbook is giving all new players a deposit bonus up to $1,000 when signing up using promo code CRUSHED. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT.
Odoo is a suite of business apps, but what does that really mean? You're on your computer, maybe in your PJs, maybe not. You have a tab open with a dashboard of applications, one for every department in your company. There's manufacturing, accounting, website, purchase, and more. You click on the CRM app and reach out to new opportunities. Then you click on the inventory app to make sure your stock levels are good before clicking on the sales app to send a quote to a customer. How many tabs do you have open? Just one. Odoo makes things simple. Go to odoo.com/sports to start a free trial. That's odoo.com/sports. Let's go back to the very beginning of this podcast. I was 10 and sitting on a toy rocking horse, watching Mark McGwire break the single-season home run record. Millions of people can tell you where they were at that exact second. And Tim Ferneris, a longtime groundskeeper at Busch Stadium, has the best story of all.
So it was myself, my brother at the time was on the grounds crew, and then there were 4 other guys. And we're all just sitting up on this wall.
They were on the job, perched in a spot in left field that's off limits to fans, waiting.
And when he comes up, he hits the ball.
Down the left field line, is it enough?
And it's so low.
It looked as if the ball might hit the outfield wall. But instead, it just cleared it and landed in the bowels of the stadium, where no fans have access. But Ferneris and his brother were sitting just a few feet away.
And I just start running. And there was a batting cage net that was back there, and it hit that net and just fell on the ground. So I just stuff it in my pocket, and I turn to my brother, and I'm like, I've got the ball. And he's like, I know.
That's right. Ferneris caught 62. He ran toward the Cardinals clubhouse, looking for someone to tell, someone who could help him give the ball back to McGwire. And that's exactly what he did in the ceremony on the field after the game.
Mr. McGwire, I think I have something that belongs to you.
I mean, they couldn't have made up a better character if they tried. The young, extremely Midwestern groundskeeper who just wanted to see the ball return to its rightful owner. For a moment, Ferneris was famous. Everybody wanted him. David Letterman, The Today Show. So after the game, he raced home, packed, and rushed to the airport.
We got pulled over, and the police were like, we know who you are. We'll escort you. So they gave us a police escort to that airport out in Chesterfield.
All the way to Chesterfield?
Yeah.
That's a long drive.
Yeah.
I first met Ferneris years ago. I interviewed him for a story, and that day, he gave me a Powerball ticket. He told me if I won, well, maybe I'd have some idea how it felt to be him back in 1998. He still clearly took so much joy in that moment, no matter what he learned about it and McGwire in the aftermath. He seemed calm and accepting of the fact that this momentous season in our hometown, this home run that made him famous, was kind of a product of smoke and mirrors. And when I started working on this podcast, I knew I wanted to talk to Ferneris again. So last summer, I met up with him, socially distanced, of course, outside Busch Stadium. The new Busch Stadium, that is. The one where I attended games as a kid and where he nabbed 62 was demolished in 2005.
I miss the old stadium.
Yeah, I do too. Right before the stadium went down, I took some pictures of just kind of that back area.
He's talking about the area behind the left field wall, where he grabbed the ball.
I have a chunk of the concrete, just kind of a random chunk.
Where's your piece of concrete? Do you have it, do you know where it is in your house?
No, I don't. I'm not a big, man cave guy that has all stuff. I have a few things here or there that are very special to me, but, I'm not a real big memorabilia guy.
That's obvious. Ferneris said he knew all along, even when catching the ball was just something he daydreamed about on his way to work, that he would give it back.
Like if I put myself in his shoes and hit the home run, I would like for whoever got the ball to give it to me. You know, it was a pretty easy decision because of that.
Forneris could have sold that ball for millions. But he was so swept up in the home run race, so intent on giving something tangible back to the man who'd given him the summer of a lifetime, that he didn't even consider it. It's almost as if he was the only one who knew its true value, that the record it set was cheap, and the memory of giving it back would be worth so much more.
McGwire has now admitted to taking steroids. For you, has that changed what you experienced in '98 at all, or are you able to hold that separately from what's come since?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it obviously it taints, you know, what happened there, but, you know, it was such a special experience for me, and it's become more than just the ball. You know, I've met a lot of great people because of it. I've done a lot of neat things because of it. It's hard to, you know, kind of take it away of what that ball gave to me.
Forneris was still in college when he caught the ball, and he went on to graduate from law school. But he still works weekends on the grounds crew. He's so devoted to baseball, he rakes infield dirt for fun. And even he worries about the lingering effects of the steroid era.
I'm scared kind of for the game in a way, because you have to, I think, to be a great baseball fan, it has to start when you're really young.
Forneris started young. I started young. My dad started young. And then he taught me about the game he loved, about Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and Curt Flood and Ozzie Smith. I don't have kids, but if I do someday, what will I teach them? Baseball has always sold its past, staked its place in American culture on what came before, the heroes and the legends. And we, the people who love the game, perpetuate that. We tell our stories and turn them into legends. We chip our teeth and move jerseys we'll never wear again, from apartment to apartment, city to city, unable and unwilling to sever ties with our memories. But the steroid era caused a kind of fissure. Baseball trades in nostalgia, but it acts as if the moment my generation is nostalgic for never happened. It wants to move on, but that leaves people like me behind. What stories are we supposed to tell?
I think everybody likes what they like and partly what they grew up with.
That's my dad, Tom. I remember back in '98 getting the sense that he was underwhelmed, that this wasn't his baseball.
You know, looking back into the 60s, they did hit home runs, but really the thing that affected me more intellectually with watching baseball was when Whitey Herzog came to the Cardinals. He's the greatest baseball strategist as a manager that I've ever seen.
Herzog was known for coaching small ball, so the polar opposite of the steroid era. He manufactured runs and avoided mistakes at all costs.
Seeing the strategy and the hit and runs and all the things they did made it much more interesting.
So can we have you on the record saying that you hate home runs? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Having the home run being the only thing that you're trying for and be the source of most of the scoring is not a good thing.
If you can watch one thing happen on a baseball field, what would it be?
I have no idea.
What's the most exciting thing to you?
Well, having watched Lou Brock, you talk about him stealing a base is great. It's like the same thing as watching Mark McGwire stand there to hit a home run. Everybody's watching him hit. Well, when Lou Brock would get on base, the whole place just lit up because everybody's saying, when's he going to go? Is he going to go on this pitch? Is he going to go on this pitch?
I feel like I kind of missed out on that kind of baseball. I've never really had somebody I watched that consistently who was able to do that.
Correct.
Do you pity me?
Sure.
Baseball is always dying, always rising again from the ashes. Every generation thinks its version is the best, the truest. And then the game evolves and we complain. In the life cycle of every generation, there's always a problem. And then we fix it, or we move on. We mistake growth for death. And naturally, most talk of the steroid era ends with what it destroyed, what ended. Trust, innocence, memories. Stuff it's impossible to measure, to quantify. Numbers don't paint the clearest picture. Yes, attendance slipped after 2001 when Bonds broke the record, but it surged again in the years after the hearings, reaching an all-time high in 2007. Only later did it start dropping, ever so slightly each year. But this season, something's happening. Something's changing. Yes, ballparks are at limited capacity because of the coronavirus pandemic, but streaming numbers have never been higher. National broadcasts are blowing previous year's ratings out of the water. Baseball is, dare I say, exciting.
Swing and a drive. Get up, ball. Get out of here. How about a 3-homer night for Vladdy?
And Fernando has left the building again. Fernando Tatis Jr. with 2 last night leads off with another home run.
Fernando Tatis Jr., Vladimir Guerrero Jr. These guys' dads were McGwire's contemporaries. Fernando Sr. was even his teammate in '98. And now they're the faces of baseball, the men powering the latest reincarnation of America's pastime. It's not better than what came before, just different. A moment in time, a chapter in a decades-long story. And as for the steroids chapter, well, I wish baseball could have ended it faster, better, without sacrificing so many careers and memories, without losing the fans it inevitably lost. But if it had, would '98 have happened? Would I have fallen for baseball the way I did? Or am I the product of everything I watched? Of the blasts and the records, of the cheating and the lying? I'm skeptical of baseball, and I wish I weren't, but I'll also never take it for granted. When I stood in a bar during Game 6 of the 2011 World Series, watching as the Cardinals were 1 strike away from elimination, I knew they still had a chance. They won it all. And it was the home run race, the steroid era, that taught me to believe in the ridiculous. And I hate that. I hate that men who cheated taught me to hope. Sure, eventually I learned what McGwire did was manufactured, but the belief is what sticks with me. The knowledge that in baseball, in this sport where even the greatest players fail more than they succeed, heroes can defy the longest odds. But this broken moment did more than destroy. It shaped me, lit up my hometown, gave me something I could talk to my dad about for years, something I'll pass on someday to the next generation. Through it all, through moves and disagreements, through births and deaths and elections and pandemics, the steroid era, in the end, gave me baseball.
Oh, it's just part of the way of life. It's a constant presence because they play 162 games plus the playoffs, so about half the days in the year are going to have a baseball game, so it's always there. So when you lose the game, you just think, well, we'll see you again tomorrow and make up for it.
I'm Joan Neeson, and this has been Crushed. Crushed is written and reported by me, Joan Neeson. Jessica Popovac is our senior producer. Our associate producer is Devin Manzi, and our production assistant is Megan Coyle. Michael Garofalo is our editor. Jane Ackerman fact-checked the series, and Tommy Bazarian from PRX Productions mixed this episode. Gautam Chopra, Amit Sankaran, and Adam Schlossman are our executive producers. Special thanks to Lisa Pollock and to composer Michael Kramer. Crushed is a production of Religion of Sports and PRX. If you like the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do your listening. On behalf of everyone on the Crush team and at Religion of Sports, we want to thank sponsors Odoo, Progressive, DraftKings, and BetterHelp Online Counseling for supporting the show and its creators during our launch.
From PRX.